Hi everybody! A really important topic, this one, that of international competitiveness. Why is it so important? Well, in a globalized world, when countries have to compete with one another in order to maintain levels of growth, in order to increase living standards, then making sure that a country is competitive is fundamental. Here is a definition of international competitiveness. The ability of a nation to compete successfully overseas, that's important, in order to sustain improvements in living standards and output. The key thing is right at the start here, to compete successfully overseas. One country to compete with another country. In terms of competitiveness, we can dissect the concept and look at three specific things which will determine whether a country is competitive or not. We can look at competitiveness in terms of the price competitiveness of a nation's goods and services. And that makes complete sense, because when it comes to competing successfully overseas, selling your products and services overseas, if they are not price competitive relative to another country, then you as a nation are going to struggle to sell and to compete. So price competitiveness is fundamental. Non-price competitiveness is important too. So in nations where maybe price competitiveness is lacking, and where maybe unit labour costs are quite high, just generally costs are quite high, which translate to higher prices. If that nation can compete on non-price factors, like on branding, brand loyalty, high service quality, reliability, innovation when it comes to its products and when it comes to its services, then it too can be quite competitive overseas. So non-price competitiveness is a very important factor as well. But this one down below, this third one, has become more and more important as the world has become more globalized. We can look at competitiveness also in terms of the ability of a nation to attract foreign direct investment. More generally, just to attract factors of production. So attracting skilled labour from abroad, attracting skillful entrepreneurs, high-profile entrepreneurs from abroad. But more specifically, attracting businesses from abroad, capital from abroad. Basically, foreign direct investment. So that's another key idea when it comes to competitiveness. If a country can attract FDI without much issue at all, then by definition it must be quite competitive. How can we prove whether a country or a nation is becoming more competitive? Well, there are three fundamental measures of competitiveness, and I put them on the side here, abbreviated. The first one I would say is the driving measure, the driving kind of factor, the one that's used the most. And that is unit labour costs. Unit labour costs are a big factor that will determine competitiveness, especially price competitiveness. So what are unit labour costs? Well, there is an equation to actually get to this measure, and that is the total labour cost divided by output produced. So what kind of things will determine unit labour costs? Well, productivity. If productivity is high and labour costs stay the same, then the bottom part of the equation will be increasing, the top part of the equation will remain constant, and this will drive down unit labour costs and keep prices relatively low, improving the price competitiveness of a country's goods and services. Productivity is important. Skills, more generally, are quite important. Again, that can lead to higher levels of output without increasing costs. But what things can maybe hinder unit labour costs and therefore competitiveness? Well, low productivity, of course, but things like strict labour regulations, like high minimum wages, are going to increase unit labour costs. They're going to increase the numerator of that equation right there. So unit labour costs are a big driver of competitiveness and certainly affect the price competitiveness of a country's goods and services. Number 2 here stands for the Global Competitiveness Index. This is a measure, a kind of all-encompassing measure of competitiveness, recognizing the fact that competitiveness is not determined by one or two simple things, not just labour-related factors, but actually there are lots of different factors, some of which I put in blue down here, which will constitute and lead to competitiveness. Things like infrastructure, things like business sophistication, things like rates of innovation, tax levels. All these kind of fundamental factors are included in this all-encompassing measure. And for each given determinant of competitiveness, that's accounted for in the GCI, a rating is given, and then overall, when all these different factors have been rated for a given nation, we then get an overall index figure of how competitive that nation is. So the actual understanding of how the GCI is formulated is not important, but maybe in an essay writing that as a result of policies maybe that can improve competitiveness, a nation will improve its rank on the Global Competitiveness Index, is going to score good marks because it shows that you understand that the GCI is a fundamental measure of competitiveness. If you want to learn more about that, you can research it. There are some good journals and good literature out there on the GCI. The terms of trade is another good way of looking at the price competitiveness of a country's goods and services. So you should know that the terms of trade is just a little equation where we have the index of export prices for a nation over the index of import prices, times that by 100 and you get the terms of trade. The greater the number, the better the terms of trade position, but actually the worse in terms of the price competitiveness of a country's goods and services. So a deterioration of the terms of trade implies potentially that export prices have fallen for a nation, which implies an improvement in competitiveness. So the terms of trade is another way we can measure competitiveness. In blue, there are very important factors that can determine international competitiveness. So if any one of these things here, any one of these 8 things improve and become better, then economists tend to say that, okay, international competitiveness for a nation should, in theory, improve as well. So what kind of things are the key determinants of international competitiveness? Well, we've just talked about unit labour costs. Don't need to go through that again, but it's a fundamental driver. We can dissect that down into productivity, minimum wages, skills in the labour force, that kind of thing. Skills is there as a separate factor, number 3, but number 2 here, labour flexibility. Now, how easy can workers actually move jobs? What are the flexibility in terms of skills that the labour force has? What are the flexible kind of working arrangements that a country has? Do workers like to work part-time? If they do, that can be quite helpful and useful for businesses. Are workers willing to work on 0 hours contracts? It might not be good for them, but again, that's good for businesses, that's good for flexibility. So all these factors are important when determining labour flexibility. The more flexible the labour force is, the more a nation is likely to be more internationally competitive and certainly attract FDI. Number 4, tax regimes are very important. We can look at corporation taxes in terms of stimulating technology and innovation, new capital. That's going to be useful for efficiency, increased efficiency in the country, and that will improve price competitiveness. With new technology, you would expect the non-price competitiveness of goods and services to improve too. And if corporation taxes are low, then attracting foreign firms to a nation should be relatively simple. So tax regimes are important in improving competitiveness. Also income taxes. If income taxes are low, it becomes easy to attract workers from abroad. It becomes easier to make workers in your own nation take jobs instead of sitting back and maybe relying on leisure instead of actually wanting to work. We've got here innovation. Innovation is key, isn't it, for price and non-price competitiveness of a country's goods and services. Infrastructure is especially important for boosting the efficiency of domestic firms, and with stronger infrastructure, moving goods and services around the country and internationally becomes easier, becomes quicker, becomes cheaper. This may translate into lower prices. And of course, with stronger infrastructure, the ability to attract FDI is much easier. Regulation. Regulation enforces costs. It makes it more difficult and it elongates the process of actually doing business. So with more deregulation or less strict regulation in a nation, you would expect prices to be lower, you would expect it to be much easier to attract foreign direct investment. And of course, the more stable a climate you have, the easier it will be to attract foreign direct investment, which more generally foreign factors of production that are needed in a nation. So when you think about all these drivers, these determinants of competitiveness, you're trying to link each one to one or more of these 3 things up here. The price competitiveness, or the non-price competitiveness of a nation's goods and services, or the ability of a country to attract foreign direct investment. In theory, these blue things should improve at least one of those things there, which will imply an increase in international competitiveness. And just to finish this video off, we can look at the UK. Currently, this video is made in 2015, the UK is ranked quite highly on the Global Competitiveness Index, ranked currently 9th in the world. And that's because, as a nation, we are very competitive in some of these key fields. Our labour force is very flexible. We have a highly skilled labour force. Our tax regimes are very competitive. We have the lowest corporation tax rate in the developed world, for example. Our income tax rates are relatively competitive. We have good infrastructure. Our regulation is quite low. Since the global financial crisis, our macroeconomy is more stable than some of our major competitors. Absolutely. So in that sense, we are quite competitive, and these factors will feature quite highly in the Global Competitiveness Index. But at the same time, where we struggle in the UK is with the price competitiveness of some of our goods and services. We have very high minimum wages in the UK. Our productivity in the UK is quite low, and all these factors actually drive up human labour costs and maybe make us less competitive in key areas compared to other nations. So yes, very competitive in some respects. We find it very easy in the UK to attract FDI. Our non-price competitiveness is very good, very strong, reliable, we are seeing in the UK. But what's holding us back is our lack of price competitiveness, coming back to low productivity, high minimum wages. So that is international competitiveness, a really important A-level concept, A2 level concept. Make sure you learn this well. I'll see you all next time. Thank you very much.